teachings, practices, interpretations, and opinions presented in this series reflect the traditions and perspectives of the Temple of the Two Guides and the Church of Thessaly exclusively. They are not presented as universal to all forms of Hellenic, Hellenistic, Neoplatonic, pagan, polytheist, occult, or theurgical practice. Ancient traditions were historically diverse, and modern practitioners likewise hold a wide range of beliefs, customs, and interpretations. This series is intended as a presentation of our own temple tradition, philosophy, and religious practice.
In truth, first of all chaos came to be, and then broad-breasted Gaia, the ever-immovable seat of all the immortals who possess snowy Olympus peak and murky Tartarus in the depths of the broad path Earth, and Eros, who is the most beautiful among the immortal gods, the lymph melter. He overpowers the mind and the thoughtful counsel of all the gods and all human beings in their hearts. From chaos, Erebos and Nyx, the Black Night, came to be, and then Ether and Day came forth from Nyx, who conceived and bore them after mingling in love with Erebos.
When we think about order, we often imagine something being imposed from the outside, someone taking a chaotic situation and forcing it into shape. But in Thessalian theology, that's not how reality works. Order isn't something that gets stamped onto the universe. Instead, it unfolds naturally through relationships, participation, and gradual development. Reality grows into what it is meant to become. Think about a seed becoming a tree. The tree doesn't suddenly appear all at once. The possibility of the tree exists first, and over time that possibility unfolds into an actual living thing. Thessalian philosophy sees the cosmos in much the same way. Before there is actuality, there is potentiality. Before there is form, there is possibility. What we experience as the universe is the result of a continual process of emergence, where higher principles gradually give rise to increasingly diverse forms of existence. This understanding comes from what philosophers call emanationism. Rather than reality being created instantaneously in its finished form, existence unfolds in stages. Each level of reality emerges from what came before it, while remaining connected to its source. In this way, the cosmos is not a finished machine that was assembled all at once. It is a living process of becoming, constantly unfolding from unity into multiplicity and revealing more of its hidden possibilities. This idea of reality unfolding in stages is beautifully illustrated in the opening lines of Hesiod's Theogony. Hesiod tells us that first came chaos. In the Thessalian understanding, chaos is not evil, nor is it simply disorder. It represents the undifferentiated condition of possibility, the openness from which all things may emerge. Next comes Gaia, the earth. Notice that the first thing to arise is a stable foundation. Before there can be a cosmos, there must be a ground upon which a cosmos can exist. Then comes Eros. Once there is a foundation, there must also be a principle of attraction and relationship. Eros is the force that draws things together and makes generation possible. Without Eros, existence would remain isolated and fragmented. From chaos also arise Erebos and Nyx, darkness and night. At first glance, this may seem strange, but differentiation requires contrast. Before there can be light, there must be darkness. Before there can be clarity, there must be mystery. Finally, from night and darkness come ether and day, the heavenly brightness and the light by which things become visible. What was hidden begins to be revealed. Notice the pattern. Foundation precedes stability. Attraction precedes relationship. Darkness precedes illumination. Each stage creates the conditions necessary for the next stage to emerge. Hesiod is showing us that order does not appear all at once. Reality unfolds through a sequence of manifestations, moving from possibility toward form, from hiddenness toward revelation, and from simplicity toward the rich diversity of the cosmos.
Gaia, first of all, bore Uranus, the starry sky, equal to herself, to cover her on every side, so that she would be the ever-immovable seat for the blessed gods. And she bore the high mountains, the graceful haunts of the goddesses, nymphs who dwell on the wooded mountains. And she also bore the barren sea, seething with its swell, Pontus, all of them without delightful love. And then, having bedded with Uranus, she bore deep eddying ocean, and Coeus, and Creus, and Hyperion, and Iapetus, and Thea, and Rhea, and Themis, and Mnemosyne, and golden-crowned Phoebe, and lovely Tethys. After these, Cronos was born, the youngest of all, crooked-counselled, the most terrible of her children, and he hated his vigorous father. Then she bore the Cyclopes, who have very violent hearts, Brontes, thunder, and Steropes, lightning, and strong-spirited Arges, bright, those who gave thunder to Zeus and fashioned the thunderbolt. These were like the gods in other regards, but only one eye was set in the middle of their foreheads, and they were called Cyclopes, circle-eyed, by name. Strength and force and contrivances were in their works. Then from Gaia and Uranus came forth 3 more sons, great and strong, unspeakable, Cotus and Briareus and Gyges, presumptuous children. 100 arms sprang forth from their shoulders, unapproachable, and upon their massive limbs grew 50 heads out of each one's shoulders, and the mighty strength in their great forms was immense.
The next figure to emerge in Hesiod's account is Ouranos, the sky. What's interesting is that Hesiod tells us that Gaia brought forth Ouranos as her equal. That's an important detail because it tells us that the relationship between earth and sky is not one of domination, but of cooperation. Ouranos does not conquer Gaia, nor does he replace her. Instead, he surrounds her, defines her boundaries, and creates the conditions that allow her creative powers to become organized and fruitful. Together, earth and sky transform an undifferentiated world into a structured cosmos. From a Thessalian perspective, this teaches us something important about authority. True authority is not about control for its own sake. It is not about imposing one's will on others. Rather, authority exists to provide stability, structure, and protection so that life can flourish. In other words, legitimate power serves what already exists. It helps bring potential into actuality. When authority supports and nurtures the source of life, it becomes constructive. When it seeks to dominate, replace, or suppress that source, it becomes destructive. This principle carries directly into sacred leadership. A priest, priestess, or temple officer is not meant to impose order upon a community through force. Their role is to provide a framework within which divine life can emerge, grow, and be sustained. Like Ouranos surrounding Gaia, sacred leadership creates the conditions in which the work of the gods can unfold safely, harmoniously, and fruitfully. One of the interesting details in Hesiod's account is that some of Gaia's earliest creations come into existence before the appearance of Eros. Later in the myth, Eros becomes the force of attraction, relationship, and generation. But before that happens, Gaia brings forth the mountains and the sea through her own creative power. This tells us that not all creation begins with desire or union. Some things must first be established as foundations within the cosmos. The mountains represent stability, elevation, and sacred presence. In myth, mountains often become the dwelling places of gods, nymphs, and divine powers. They stand as places where heaven and earth seem to meet. The sea, represented by Pontus, symbolizes something very different. The sea is powerful, dynamic, and untamed. It is a force of tremendous potential, but it has not yet been brought into harmony through relationship and order. From a Thessalian perspective, there is an important lesson here. Eros is a sacred force, but it is not the first principle. Before desire can create, there must be something stable for it to act upon. Before energy can be directed, there must be a structure capable of containing it. We see this principle everywhere in life. A seed needs soil before it can grow. A temple requires foundations before rituals can be performed within it. Even wisdom requires a prepared mind before it can take root. The same is true in spiritual practice. Many people seek mystical experiences, divine encounters, or powerful rituals, but Hesiod reminds us that preparation comes first. Grounding comes before inspiration. Purification comes before invocation. Structure comes before transformation. In other words, sacred power becomes beneficial only when it has a place to dwell. Without preparation, even a divine force can become overwhelming. But when the proper foundations are established, that same force becomes a source of growth, revelation, and communion with the gods. As Gaia and Uranos continue the work of creation, they bring forth the Titans. At first glance, it's easy to read these figures simply as divine ancestors in a cosmic family tree. But from a Thessalian perspective, the Titans represent something much deeper. Each Titan embodies a fundamental principle that helps make the cosmos possible. Oceanus represents continuity and the flowing interconnectedness of existence. Mnemosyne embodies memory, the power by which knowledge and identity are preserved. Themis represents divine order, justice, and right relationship. Hyperion embodies illumination, bringing light and awareness into the cosmos. When we begin to see the Titans in this way, mythology becomes more than a story about supernatural beings. It becomes a symbolic language for describing the powers and principles that operate throughout reality. This also helps us understand why the Titans are not the final expression of divine order. Their limitation is not that they are evil or flawed. Rather, each Titan expresses a single principle. Each governs an essential aspect of existence, but no single principle can sustain the whole cosmos by itself. Think of the human body. Memory is necessary, but memory alone cannot sustain life. Justice is necessary, but justice alone cannot sustain life. Illumination is necessary, but illumination alone cannot sustain life. Harmony arises only when these powers work together in proper relationship. The same is true within the soul. We all possess these Titan-like powers within us. We have memory, reason, creativity, ambition, discipline, and countless other faculties. Spiritual growth does not require suppressing these powers. Instead, it requires learning how to integrate them into a harmonious whole. The Titans therefore teach us an important lesson. Every power has its place, but wisdom lies in understanding how each contributes to the greater order of the cosmos. The goal is not domination by one principle, but the balanced integration of many principles working together in service of the good. Among all the Titans, Kronos occupies a unique place. He is the first figure in the myth to introduce conflict into the unfolding order of the cosmos. Hesiod describes Kronos as crooked-counseled and hostile toward his father Uranos. Traditionally, this is the beginning of the great struggle between generations of gods. But from a Thessalian perspective, the story can be read on a deeper level. Kronos represents the emergence of reflective intelligence. He is aware of the structures that gave rise to him. He understands the order established by Gaia and Uranos. Yet, instead of participating in that order, he seeks to dominate it. This is an important spiritual lesson. Intelligence by itself is not wisdom. A brilliant mind can understand how something works, while still failing to understand its proper place within a greater whole. In this sense, Kronos symbolizes reason that has become self-referential. Rather than seeking understanding, it seeks control. Rather than receiving reality with reverence, it attempts to place itself above the very order that made its existence possible. That is why Kronos should not be viewed simply as a villain. He represents a danger that exists within every human being. Whenever intellect becomes disconnected from humility, whenever knowledge loses its sense of wonder, whenever power is pursued without wisdom, the spirit of Kronos begins to emerge. The myth also introduces another important idea. Chronos is closely associated with time. Time, in its proper form, allows growth, development, and becoming. But when succession becomes separated from harmony, time becomes devouring. Everything is measured, consumed, and replaced. What should have been a process of maturation becomes a cycle of domination and fear. The lesson is not that reason is bad, nor that time is evil. Both are necessary parts of the cosmos. The warning is that these powers must remain connected to the greater order from which they arise. Intelligence requires wisdom. Power requires reverence. Time itself must serve the unfolding of the good rather than becoming an end unto itself. In the story of Chronos, we encounter the first rupture within divine order, and with it, the first reminder that every power, no matter how great, must remain aligned with its source if harmony is to be preserved. The conflict between Uranus and Chronos is often presented as a struggle between father and son, but on a deeper level, it reveals something fundamental about the nature of the cosmos. What we see here is the principle of succession. One order gives rise to another. The older order is not simply destroyed, rather its limitations become apparent, making room for a new stage of development. This is an important idea in Thessalian theology. Order is not the absence of tension. In many cases, tension is the very means through which a higher order emerges. The conflict between Uranus and Chronos creates the conditions for something greater to come, just as the reign of Chronos will eventually prepare the way for Zeus. In this sense, the myth teaches us that change is not necessarily a sign of corruption. Conflict is not always a sign of failure. Sometimes both are signs of transition. They indicate that an existing structure has reached the limits of what it can accomplish, and that a new level of integration is struggling to emerge. We see this pattern not only in mythology, but also in our own lives. A child must eventually move beyond childhood. A student must eventually move beyond simple instruction. A community must adapt as circumstances change. Growth often involves periods of uncertainty because something new is being born. This lesson is especially important for religious leadership. The task of the priest is not to freeze a tradition at one particular moment in history. Rather, the task is to preserve continuity while guiding healthy development. The challenge is to ensure that change remains connected to its source instead of becoming disconnected from it. Ancient religion itself demonstrates this principle. The Greeks did not practice their religion in exactly the same way across every city, every century, or every social setting. Rituals evolved, myths were reinterpreted, philosophers offered new theological insights. Local communities adapted practices to their own needs while remaining connected to a shared sacred inheritance. For this reason, tradition should be understood as a living stream rather than a museum exhibit. The goal is not to recreate a single historical moment with perfect accuracy. Historical reconstruction is an invaluable tool for understanding the past, but a living religion must also speak to the present. The ancients themselves adapted, developed, and reinterpreted their traditions. A modern priesthood must do the same. Our responsibility is to preserve the underlying principles, sacred aims, and theological logic of the tradition while allowing its outward forms to remain meaningful and intelligible to the people we serve today. The lesson of Uranus and Chronos, therefore, is not merely about divine conflict. It is about continuity through change. The sacred order endures not because it remains frozen, but because it possesses the wisdom to unfold into ever more complete expressions of itself. After the emergence of Chronos and the disruption of the original harmony between Gaia and Uranus, something interesting begins to happen within the cosmos. The next beings to appear are not rulers, kings, or lawgivers. Instead, the cosmos brings forth raw powers. Among these are the Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers. From a Thessalian perspective, these beings symbolize what emerges when creative energy is constrained rather than properly integrated. When harmony breaks down, the cosmos often responds by generating concentrated forms of power capable of correcting the imbalance. The Cyclopes represent one of these powers. Their single eye is particularly significant. It symbolizes focused perception, the ability to direct attention toward a single objective without distraction. They do not represent wisdom or balanced judgment. Rather, they embody concentration, precision, and effectiveness. Think of a craftsman working at a forge. In that moment, all attention is directed toward a single task. The Cyclopes represent that same principle on a cosmic scale, power focused upon a particular purpose. Because of this, they become the great smiths of the divine world. They forge the thunderbolt, the most famous weapon in Greek mythology. Yet, there is an important lesson hidden within this act. The Cyclopes create the thunderbolt, but they do not wield it. They possess the power to make the instrument, but not the authority to govern its use. This distinction is crucial. The ability to create power is not the same thing as the wisdom required to direct it. Skill is not sovereignty. Capability is not leadership. We encounter this lesson constantly in human life. A person may possess extraordinary intelligence, technical expertise, wealth, influence, or strength. Yet these gifts alone do not guarantee wisdom. Power without proper orientation can become destructive, no matter how impressive it appears. The myth therefore teaches that concentrated force must ultimately be placed in service to a higher order. The Cyclopes forged the thunderbolt, but it is later entrusted to Zeus, whose role is to harmonize the various powers of the cosmos into a just and intelligible order. For us, the lesson is clear. Talent, knowledge, and capability are sacred gifts, but their highest purpose is not self-glorification. Their highest purpose is to participate in the good. Power becomes truly beneficial only when it is aligned with wisdom and directed toward the flourishing of the whole. If the Cyclopes symbolize focused potency, the hundred-handers represent the opposite extreme. Everything about them is excessive. They possess 100 arms and 50 heads. Their power is multiplied beyond ordinary measure. They are not beings of precision or concentration. They are beings of overwhelming capacity. The symbolism is clear. The hundred-handers represent action without coordination, strength without organization, and capability without a unifying principle to direct it. This is important because power itself is not the problem. The problem is the absence of order capable of governing that power. Think of the difference between a single skilled craftsman and a full crew of workers all pulling in different directions. The craftsman may possess less raw strength, but because their efforts are coordinated, they accomplish far more. The hundred-handers symbolize the opposite condition, tremendous energy that lacks a center. This is why Hesiod describes them as strange and almost unspeakable beings. They are difficult to categorize because they exist beyond the normal patterns of proportion and intelligibility that make the cosmos understandable. Theologically, they represent the profound lesson that when proper succession and harmony are blocked, the cosmos does not simply stop. It continues generating power. But that power often emerges in distorted forms, accumulating without clear purpose or direction. We can see this pattern reflected in humans when we see a person who possesses enormous energy, ambition, talent, or passion, yet accomplishes very little because those gifts are scattered across too many pursuits. A community may have abundant resources and capable members, yet struggle because there is no shared vision to unite their efforts. In these situations, the problem is not a lack of strength. The problem is a lack of integration. The hundred-handers therefore teach us that capacity alone is not enough. Potential must be ordered. Strength must be directed. Action must be aligned with purpose. This is why they cannot yet be fully integrated into the cosmos. Their power awaits a higher principle, capable of containing it without destroying it, and directing it without suppressing it. Later, under the rule of Zeus, that higher order finally emerges. What was once excessive and ungovernable becomes useful because it is brought into harmony with the larger structure of the cosmos. The lesson for us is straightforward. The goal of spiritual development is not merely to acquire more power, more knowledge, or more ability. The goal is to cultivate the wisdom that allows those gifts to serve the good. Without order, strength becomes wasteful. With order, even the greatest power can become a force for creation and flourishing. The theological significance of these births becomes clear only in retrospect. The Cyclopes and Hundred-Handers are not errors, they are deferred solutions. This passage of Hesiod teaches us that unintegrated capacities within the soul, whether sharp insight or overwhelming drive, are not to be destroyed or denied. They need to be correctly oriented or aligned. The gods do not eliminate excess, they sanctify it through order. The priest or priestess is not chosen for strength alone, but for their ability to hold power without becoming tyrannical or fragmented. As we conclude this first exploration of Hesiod's theogony, we have seen that these myths are far more than stories about gods and monsters. They are symbolic accounts of how order emerges from possibility, how power develops within the cosmos, and how every force must eventually find its proper place within a larger harmony. We have followed the unfolding of reality from chaos to Gaia, from Gaia to Ouranos, and from the first generations of divine powers to the Titans, the Cyclopes, and the Hundred-Handers. Along the way, we have discovered a recurring lesson. Power alone is never enough. Intelligence without reverence becomes domination. Strength without order becomes excess. Capability without wisdom becomes wasteful. Again and again, the myths reveal that the cosmos moves toward integration. Every force, no matter how powerful, awaits a principle capable of bringing it into harmony with the whole. Yet the story is far from over. The tensions we have explored in this episode continue to build. Kronos has emerged. The original harmony between Gaia and Ouranos has begun to fracture. New powers are accumulating within the cosmos, and the question remains unresolved. Who will possess the wisdom necessary to bring these forces into proper order? In our next episode, we will examine one of the most dramatic moments in Greek mythology, the overthrow of Ouranos by Kronos and the rise of the Titans. We will explore what this conflict means from a theological perspective, why succession is essential to cosmic development, and how the reign of Kronos ultimately prepares the way for an even greater transformation. Most importantly, we will begin tracing the path that leads to the emergence of the Olympian gods, whose appearance represents not merely a new generation of divine beings, but the establishment of a higher and more complete order within the cosmos itself. Until then, remember the lesson of the first generations of creation. The goal is not merely to possess power, knowledge, or ability. The goal is to cultivate the wisdom that allows those gifts to serve the good. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to continuing this journey through the sacred cosmology of Hesiod's theogony with you in our next episode.